going to record there. So now we'll come into the screen share and properly get started. Okay guys, so welcome to Timing Trends with Transits, Cycles of Success. So this is a little bit of an experiment for me. I have been teaching astrology for 15 years now, but in the last 12 months, I've slightly changed the format. So I'm excited to devote 4 full weeks to transits. It's something that I haven't taught in this much depth before, but I've noticed over the years that students could really benefit from a little bit more of a deep dive into the transit part of the program. So we've expanded that out, and you guys will be my first group to go through this. So I'm excited to take you through. Tonight, being week 1, is going to be a bit of a setting the foundation class where we'll be looking at a lot of the basics and the key concepts around transits. And then I'm going to work through just a really simple current example so we can just get a sense of the approach and how we might put it into use. And then what we'll work through over the next few weeks is a lot more of the depth and the data, not just around the technique, but also the interpretive side of things as well, in terms of which transits might be more important or how a planet acts by transit and in what ways is that different from how a planet might be in the natal chart. So today is a bit of a broad overview, and then the next few weeks we'll be getting into some more detailed work. So welcome. And let's go. So this is a unit in predictive astrology, and predictive astrology is not a dirty word, although there are some forms of astrology or some particular branches or subset of astrology that are a little bit anti-predictive astrology. So I'm just letting you know that so that you know what to expect and you know what's out there. Personally, my own very humble opinion, I think predictive astrology is actually one of the great gifts of astrology. This is where all of the wonderful symbolism and the very unique timing cycles that we have in astrology, it's where it all comes together. This is where we can take the information based on the planetary cycles and we can create a forecast or an interpretation that's relevant for a specific period of time. So when we start doing predictive astrology, particularly when we're working with transits, we're building on a tool or a skill that you would have learned in the chart interpretation series, which is aspects. So I always say that aspects is actually one of the hardest topics to learn when you start studying astrology. And if you can figure out aspects, just natal aspects, once you've got that process down pat, you can do almost anything in astrology, because we're just using aspects, but we're using a moving or a temporary aspect rather than a natal or a permanent aspect. But if you've got the concept of aspects, then diving into predictive astrology is going to be, it's just an extra step, taking something you already know and using it in a different or a new way. And the big difference when we do predictive astrology is that we're looking at aspects that are created temporarily or for a specific period of time. And what I mean by that is in your birth chart, for instance, you might have a Moon-Neptune aspect. Maybe you have a Moon-Neptune square or a Moon-Neptune conjunction, but you've got an aspect. Your moon picks up the Neptune vibration. And that's a lifelong theme. So over the course of your life, you will live and explore. You'll have lots of time to breathe into the many facets of that natal Moon-Neptune aspect. What happens in predictive astrology or with transits, for instance, is that we get a temporary aspect that comes in for a short or specific period of time. Maybe that Moon-Neptune conjunction you have receives a Saturn transit when you're 32 or 56 or some other age. And for that year in your life, that Moon-Neptune thing that influences you is changed, and it takes on a Saturnian or a Saturn type quality for the period of time. So that's what we're talking about when we do predictive astrology. We're trying to figure out what are the new flavors, talents, or challenges that are showing up or coming in to your life through your chart, and when are they coming in? So that's one of the first things we have to do in predictive astrology is figure out what's happening and when, and then we have to do our interpretive process around that. So part of our journey together over the next 4 weeks is to cover off both sides of that, to figure out what transits you might be having or a client might be having, and to figure out when they will happen and then what they might mean or how they might manifest. Now, of course, when we're talking about aspects, we're talking about cycles with the planets, we are, of course, talking about planets and planetary interaction and planetary movement. So the other thing that working with predictive astrology really does is it helps you deepen your understanding of the planets and their cycles. It also will highlight if you have any little weak spots around, I'm not quite sure about this planet, or I've never really understood the fullness of that planet. Sure, those weak spots will be a little bit highlighted, but you will also get a chance to fill in those gaps. Because when we start moving with the chart in a dynamic format, we're literally working with a moving version of astrology rather than the static birth chart. That's really going to help you figure out new layers of meaning and understanding of the planets themselves and the nature of different aspects. So even if you're not feeling super strong or confident in your natal chart interpretive work, as long as you've got the bones and you understand the processes and the techniques, I actually think it's going to be really good to step into the predictive component so that what you learn in that will then feed back like a feedback loop into your natal work. So the key to doing good predictive astrology is having a solid understanding of the planets, including their meaning, their symbols, and their cycles, and also having a really great understanding of the aspects. Now, for those of you who are new to my classes, the very quick disclaimer I need to throw out is that I will be teaching, because this is how I work with astrology, in a more traditionally oriented model. And the biggest changes, I guess there's three of them, that if you haven't studied with me before, or you haven't dipped into traditional astrology in the past, the three biggest changes you'll notice will be that I'm only using the 5 original or Ptolemaic aspects. So in class, we don't really talk about semi-sextiles or inconjuncts. We'll just focus on the main 5 aspects. That said, how you take the techniques we learn in class, you can apply them in any aspect format that you like in your own time. But just so you know where I'll be coming from in terms of what I'll be delivering. I also don't use the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as sign rulers. So we'll be talking about Jupiter as the ruler of the sign of Pisces, Saturn as the ruler of the sign of Aquarius, and Mars as the ruler of the sign of Scorpio. And we'll be getting into some of our interpretive work later in class today, but also in weeks 2 and 3. That will be really important. And even if you have a very modern bent in your astrology, that's absolutely fine. There's no barrier. These techniques work in whichever version of astrology you work with. But from an interpretive perspective, I will ask you to just hold some openness about those traditional planets as the rulers of the sign, and you'll see how you can be more specific to the individual if you include that. And then the third piece, I did say there were 3 things, didn't I? Modern and traditional sign rulers, the aspects, and the third thing escapes me now. I thought there were only 2. Okay, it'll come back to me, I'm sure. I guess just to extrapolate from the planets as sign rulers, we'll also be using the planets as rulers of the houses to help be really clear on what topics a certain planet is responsible for. So I guess that could be 3, but if there is another one, I'll interrupt myself later in the class. So that's just an overview of what we're doing, building on your natal skills, deepening your understanding of planets and aspects. We'll be talking about aspects, but from a temporary or a transitory perspective rather than a lifelong perspective. Now, in predictive astrology today, there are so many different timing techniques. There's different cycles, there's modern, there's traditional, there's endless variations of all of the above. Our focus in this class is on transits. So this is I consider this to be an entry-level timing technique. It's not the most comprehensive, and when you learn transits and other techniques, I think you'll find your transits get better. So I don't necessarily want you to think, oh, I've taken a 4-week class on transits, now I know everything about predictive astrology. This is definitely a foundation getting started piece. For some of you who are coming back into this class having done other predictive modules in the past, this is going to be a good refresher and hopefully help pull everything together for you. And we are going to start with the basics of transits tonight. And I think transits is a good basics timing tool. So it introduces you to the concept of things that move and things that impact the natal chart. And that's a critical concept that you'll use in any form of predictive astrology. So to dive into our transit basics, let's get some definitions up here. What is a transit? A transit is a temporary aspect that's created by a planet moving through the sky and aspecting a natal planet or point. So a transit is literally a temporary aspect, and where it comes from is we're looking at the positions of the planets as they are in the sky now, and we're comparing that back to the natal chart to see if the transit placement of the planet is having any direct or personal impact on your own chart. One thing to remember at this point, or to remind ourselves of, is that the birth chart is a picture of the sky. The picture of something that's always in motion at the time that you were born. And what you have to remember is the planets don't stay in those places. That's where they were when you were born, when your breath incarnated your body, when you took your first breath. And those points, even though the planets move on from them, those points in your natal chart remain like energetically sensitive zodiac points for you personally. So if you think about the degree of your Venus placement in your natal chart, that degree in the zodiac has all the Venus vibration themes for you personally. So anytime that degree gets triggered, maybe it's by a sextile or maybe it's by an opposition, you will take your understanding of that natal influence to new levels. Now, the other point that I've made here is that you can have a transit that affects not just your planets, but other points like your ascendant, your midheaven, the part of fortune, anything else that you happen to be using in your chart. What a transit does is it acts like a trigger. And a trigger is something that stimulates a thing, and a latent thing, can awaken, can stir up, it can open, and it can transform. So a transit triggers the birth chart, which triggers your potential. It can help you open up to a talent that you've neglected or haven't had a chance to look into. It might highlight a problem that you are kind of aware of but haven't fully addressed. And what a transit does through that trigger to the birth chart, it highlights a window of time in which you can more fully explore parts of yourself in your life. So when you have a big transit, it's not asking you necessarily to change everything in your life, but to really hone in on to the specific topics or themes associated with whatever natal thing is receiving that transit. The key to remember when we do predictive astrology is that the birth chart is known as the radix or the root. It's the foundation of your soul, or it is the map of your psyche. And so when we're going to do any good timing, we're always looking at how the timing technique triggers the natal chart. So we always want to bring the current influences back to the natal chart. Something can be happening in the sky. We're recording this in February 2018, where we're sort of between a couple of very strong eclipses. Now, those eclipses in and of themselves are significant events, but if they're not directly triggering something really personal in your chart, like a planet or an angle, they're not going to be so dramatic in your life. And really part of our job as astrologers is to help guide our clients by learning or discovering what of the many transit or celestial events that happen every day and every week and every month, which ones of those actually are important for each individual. And because my chart is different from your chart, what's important that from a transit perspective for me won't necessarily be what's important for you. And that's part of what we'll be learning over our 4 weeks together. How to figure out which transits are more important for you and which transits are more important for me. So some key points about transits. They're based on a real-time timing technique, which means we're actually looking at where the planets are in the sky now. And this is a distinction from techniques like solar arc directions and secondary progressions, which are symbolic timing tools. And in fact, even planetary period systems or Time Lord timing systems, which we will cover later in the year for those of you who are keen to really flesh out your predictive skills. Even those kinds of techniques, they're all symbolic. And so transits are unique in that regard, where they're sort of looking at the current condition, strength, and motivation of the planets And we're just looking to see what that's doing in our chart. Transits are great actually for helping qualify some of those other timing tools. And I think one of the good reasons to learn transits now is that you will use them to refine all the other techniques that you learn over your predictive astrology career. So transits are happening in real time. We're going to look today to find out where the planets are on this date in the sky, and then we're going to do an example of how that's triggering someone's chart. Transits are also cycles that influence us for a good time and not a long time. So a transit can be active in your chart for anywhere from a couple of days if it's a transit from a quick moving planet like the moon or the sun or even Mars. Or a transit can last for over a year, maybe up to 18 months if it's from a slower moving planet like Uranus, Neptune or Pluto. Transits tend to describe external events or changes in circumstances in your environment. So transits tend to describe all the things that are happening around you and the resulting shift internally. So the key trigger with a transit is that it represents the world outside you, and it will also tell us though how you're responding to that. It will tell us how you're feeling based on what's going on around you. So it will describe your inner landscape to a certain extent, and it will certainly, the nature of the transiting planet will tell us a little bit about the things that are important to you at that particular point in time. Arguably, transits are our most common predictive tool. They are talked about by almost every level of astrologer practicing any form of astrology, modern, traditional, esoteric, spiritual, evolutionary. Everybody is working with transits. So it's a really unifying technique in that regard, that you'll be able to talk to any astrologer about this. Transits are these wonderful broad cycles that help you connect the cycles of the sky to everyday life through the way they trigger your birth chart. And a really simple way to think about this is, we've just recently had Saturn move into Capricorn in December 2017. And so Saturn moving into Capricorn is a cycle that is going to highlight the Capricorn parts of our chart in a Saturnian way. And we'll talk more about what that means as we go through our program. But very, very, loosely, Capricorn will rule a different house for each of us. I've just remembered what the third thing I was trying to tell you earlier about was. The third point of difference, so I'm just going to sidebar this, is that I, as a more traditionally inclined astrologer, I'm now working with what's called the whole sign house system. And so when I pop up our first chart tonight, you'll see what that looks like a little differently. If you've got any questions about the whole sign system or how it works, if that's new for you and you need a copy of your birth chart and whole sign, just email me. You can also ask questions in class tonight, but if you are listening after the fact, it is absolutely okay. Just shoot me an email. So yeah, the whole sign house system, that's the other piece. So the reason I remember that now is I was talking about Saturn moving into Capricorn. And so Saturn's energy around restructuring, getting grounded, maybe getting a reality check or needing to take on new tests and challenges. All of us are finding that coming through in a different area of our life now in 2018 than we did in 2017 when Saturn was in Sagittarius. So that's a really simple way. Saturn's in Capricorn for all of us, but for some of you, Saturn in Capricorn might be in your 8th house and you need to do Saturn things about 8th house topics. For someone else, Saturn in Capricorn might be in their 10th house and they're needing to do the restructuring or the adjustments of responsibility to do with career or to do with their professional life, because that's what 10th house is all about. So that's what I mean by sort of the broad cycles that are helping connect the cosmos into your everyday life in a way that is unique for you. So transits are a huge amount of fun to work with. They are, okay, sorry. Hang on a second, what's just gone wrong here? Let me get this back up, okay. Oh, sorry guys. Every now and then we will have a little glitch like that where I'll hit the wrong thing. Okay, let's come back in here. Okay, here we go. Transits are fun. How can we miss that? They're a wonderful introduction to working with planetary cycles. What this is going to help you understand is things like stations and retrogrades, how quickly certain planets move, how slowly other planets move. Transits are really simple and accessible. Once you learn the process, which is not that different from finding an aspect in a natal chart. So once you learn the process and you learn how to read this wonderful book called An Ephemeris, which is what we're going to talk about very shortly, Transits is such an accessible way of working with astrology, and it's really immediate. So if you're trying to understand how your life and your everyday or your week to week, month to month is influenced by astrology, starting to track some of the cycles like the sun cycle, the moon cycle, or even the Mars cycle is a really fun way of doing that. So to work with transits, the first thing you're going to have to figure out is where the planets are now in the sky. And that's where the Ephemeris, that wonderful book I was just talking about, comes in. So your Ephemeris is going to be your best friend. Depending on whether you're an old school paper gal like me, or paper person, I should say, or whether you are a more modern, do everything on a device, we have all kinds of ephemerises for you. I actually, even if you are quite techie and very modern, I still would recommend that you get a hard copy version. I travel with my ephemeris. I'm just sort of trying to explain how important this book is to you guys. It's the one book that never goes in my checked luggage when I fly. It's always in my carry-on. This is the ephemeris for 2000 to 2050. And this is actually as dog-eared as this book, sorry, it certainly looks like, and all my little extra notes. This is actually my second book. So we're only 18 years into the production of using this book, and I've had to replace it once already. So when you are a working astrologer and you're doing, whether you're doing readings or you're writing blogs or you're doing horoscopes, you will kind of refer to that book. It's a really quick, easy guide. So, but here's the link for the online ephemeris, because it is all online free. So the best thing to do is Google Swiss ephemeris and whatever month or year you're looking for, and we'll take a look at that link shortly, but I wanted to include it in the PowerPoint so that you guys can try some DIY at home. If you've got a book ephemeris, you would just open up to February 2018. An ephemeris is a calendar, and in that calendar, it's basically tables and tables of planetary data. And we're going to have a look at that shortly, but just so you can see, there's a lot of numbers. It's like a Virgo happy place, but all of us can get what we need out of here. Now, back in the olden days, when I was just starting, we had the red ephemeris, which covered from 1900 to 2000. And when I first started doing astrology, we had to calculate charts by hand, which is why we needed an ephemeris for our birth date. And if you're going to do predictive work like progressions, you will need an ephemeris that covers your birth year as well. And then, so when 2000 ran out, then we got our blue book, which is 2000 to 2050. What they've done very cleverly is they have merged the two into a purple book, which covers from 1950 to 2050. So this is the ephemeris. This is the version of the ephemeris that I recommend. There's a few different kinds. The Swiss ephemeris that we're looking at online also has a printed copy, but the American ephemeris is the one that I prefer. Whether you buy the Swiss ephemeris or the American ephemeris, you will want to get a book or an ephemeris that is at midnight. They do have midday versions of these ephemerises, and I recommend that you get the midnight version. And Nadia is saying she was looking at the planets today in the ephemeris. Excellent. That's and the reason I wanted to mention this very early in this program is this is the tool that's going to give you the information or the facts about where the planets are at any given day. That's your data. And as those of you who've taken my chart interpretation classes will know, we work on, a step-by-step process. And the first step is always gathering the data. What's happening and when is it happening? Then we have to do some prioritization of all those things that's happening. What is the most important pieces? And then we do our interpretive work. It's very easy to want to just start interpreting from the get-go, but what you end up doing is interpreting stuff that doesn't matter so much. So we like to go through our process. So that's the ephemeris. That's what it looks like. If you Google American ephemeris, you'll find it in all of your online booksellers, wherever you are, basically. So let's dive into our ephemeris. So here is a screenshot from the Swiss ephemeris. This is the free online version for February 2018. And as you can see, it's definitely a Virgo happy place where we've got lots of columns and data and numbers. So we've got the dates of the month running down this column. So we'd be looking today, we're recording, I'm in the Eastern time zone as I record this, and it's Monday the 5th of Feb. And so we'd be really looking, if I can keep my things straight, this is the reference for where the planets were at midnight in Greenwich, which is where sort of time starts. Now, if you were calculating a chart by hand and you needed to be more specific than that, you would have to do some adjustment calculations. Thankfully, we're not. We don't have to get that technical. And so just reading off the midnight reference, unless you're working with a planet like the moon, which moves very quickly. But for the most part, our transit work is with the slightly slower moving planets. So we can just read the data out of here and be safe with that. All the planets run across in the top row here. So the first day of the month is a Tuesday, second is February, the 2nd was a Friday. This column here is sidereal time, and that's to do with star time. If you are calculating charts by hand, you need to know all about that column, but we're not, so we can ignore that, which is great. And then we have all our planet columns here: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. The North Node, there'll be a true node and a mean node, which are not very far apart most of the time. We've also got Ceres and Chiron. Being a little bit traditional, I don't work with Chiron or Ceres, or maybe it's Black Moon Lilith. There you go. I'm not even 100% sure what that one is. But if you work with those bodies, they are in this ephemeris too. And so if you want to find out where a planet is, it's just a matter of going down their particular column to the date you're looking for. Now, a couple of other things you'll want to know. The sign that a planet is in. So if we look at Venus's placement today, for instance, just here, it's telling us 22 degrees, 31 minutes. And we just then back up the column and we'll hit either the start of the month, which has the sign reference, or we could go down the column to see when she changes signs, and we will see the new planet symbol coming up there. Now, the only trick is that this is the reference for midnight. So if Venus moves into Pisces on the 11th, or if we read, let me be very Virgo about my word choice here. On the 11th of February, the reference for Venus is that she is at 0 degrees of Pisces, 2 minutes. So if she's already at 0 Pisces at midnight on Sunday the 11th, that means she actually moved into Pisces the day before on Saturday the 10th. That's the only catch, if you like, with using the ephemeris. Again, as I said, because we're tending to use sort of slower moving planets, it's not going to be a huge issue. You'll always be within 24 hours, basically. But the most correct answer to the question, on what day does Venus enter Pisces in February 28, it would be Saturday the 10th, and that's in Greenwich. So for the rest of us, it might be Friday the 9th or earlier on the morning of Saturday the 10th. So you'd want to come back just by that day. Hopefully that piece is clear and not too confusing for you. If anybody has any questions about that piece, please let me know. I'll just take some of this out of here. And when we are doing our transits, you won't usually be talking to clients or be even looking in your own chart about, say, sun transits or moon transits or Mercury transits. Although I will say that watching sun and Mars transits are great if you're just looking at house by house, like your own personal calendar. For the most part, when you're doing big transit work, you'll be working with transits Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So that they will be the columns that we would focus on most. And so what we probably need to get a little handle on is where each of those planets are right now. So Jupiter is at 2139 Scorpio. So the degrees are just here, and we run up to see where Jupiter is. So I'm just going to get you guys, I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions and see if you can pop your answers into the chat box. Now, if you haven't found the chat box yet, just bring your cursor over to the corner of one of your Zoom screens and you should be able to run it over the menu bar. One of the options will bring up the chat box. It might be under the More option for you. So basically, I'm wondering if you can tell me where Saturn is today, what degree and what sign, where Uranus is today. Maybe pick 2 of the 4, Saturn and Uranus, or Saturn, Neptune, Neptune, Pluto, Uranus and Neptune. See if you can tell me where those 4 planets are today. So they're the degrees. And then you've got to just back up the column to see what sign they're in. So I'll give you guys a minute or 2 with that. And if you're listening at home, have a think. Great. Perfect. And I love how this is unfolding, which is wonderful. Some people are being very precise. Saturn at 5 degrees, 14 minutes, Capricorn. Other people are just rounding and saying Saturn at 5 Capricorn. It's totally okay to round at this point because really it's the 5-degree marker for Saturn in Cap that is significant for right now. So what we're essentially saying is the degree in the zodiac that Saturn is activating right now is 5 Capricorn. And there will be certain other degrees in the zodiac that are aspected by Saturn at 5 Capricorn. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into our example. Likewise, Uranus is at 25 Aries. So 25 Aries is a hotspot degree for the energy of Uranus right now. Neptune is at 12 degrees Pisces. And so bringing its vibration into 12 Pisces and all the degrees that 12 Pisces aspects. And then Pluto, is at 19 Capricorn, almost at 20 Capricorn, which is great. So I think everybody got that little exercise spot on. Brilliant. And then the final other piece, just to show you that's interesting to grab out of this data, is the when a planet goes retrograde. Now, we don't have any Mercury, Venus or Mars retrogrades happening in February, but what we will have is, as always, we're going to have some nodal action where one of the nodes goes retrograde. And in this Swiss style ephemeris, you just look in the column for the D for direct or R for retrograde. Now, the nodes actually, and especially in eclipse season, the nodes are almost stationary. So you can see the node is chopping and changing quite a lot. It's retrograde for a few days, then it's going to be direct for a few days, then it's going to be retrograde for a few days. So just so you can get used to seeing, if you're using the online free version, you'll be looking for R's and D's to tell you when there's a retrograde. One of the reasons I prefer the American ephemeris is that the retrogrades in the American ephemeris are shaded. So they kind of go a grey colour. For instance, this is the ephemeris for the middle of the year, and you can see the change with the Mars column going from direct to retrograde, I think. I don't know if you can see it close enough. That's one reason I prefer the Michelson ephemeris. The other reason is that the new and full moon data, these are also the other things. These are the things that, I'm trying to think that you would use as a timing tool astrologer, but also that you might use if you're telling people about astrology. In the Michelson display, the very bottom section on each page has all the new and full moon data, which I find really handy to have. However, the new and full moon data is actually available free online. So we're just going to pop out of our presentation here, and I'm going to show you the website. The website is called timeanddate.com, And if you have not yet discovered this website, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is very accurate and it has all the new and full moon data for just about anywhere at any time. So the URL at the top there, you can see I've just highlighted timeanddate.com/moon/phases. And what you can do, I've got it for the nearest large city to where I am, which is Caledon, Ontario. And basically this Caledon's very near Toronto, so we're in the Eastern time zone. So this is telling what all the moon phases are for this location for 2018. So if you're looking to do any work with new moons or full moons, which are definitely worth your time and effort, this will be the kind of website that can be great for you to have a look at. We've got the new moons here, date and time, the full moon column here. We've also got first quarter and third quarter. So a wonderful resource. If you're a working astrologer and needing to convert times for things internationally, this website will also do that for you. So I'm sure the Swiss Ephemeris has this data in the front of it somewhere. It's just that I think that's so handy to have that website these days. So back to our presentation. Okay. Now, so we've taken our time to make sure we can read the ephemeris, which is golden. And what you guys are probably starting to think about is what we will do next, which is how are where the planets in the sky are today, how is that affecting me? So we've looked at the ephemeris. The other point I need to make about reading the ephemeris is that you can look backwards to the past and you can go forward to the future. So as I mentioned, we've got ephemeris data. We could go 20 years into the future. We can go back to when you were 5 years old. So it's just a matter of looking up, like going through a calendar. And we've looked at this, we've gone through this slide here in terms of looking at, where Saturn is today or where Neptune is today, which is important that you can do that, which is great. I've just seen a question come through. Jen's sharing another resource here. The USNO's complete sun and moon data for one day, which is great. I mean, I guess what I should say about the time and date website, it doesn't have any astrological information. So it will tell you that there is a new moon or a full moon on a particular date at a particular time, but it won't necessarily say, oh, this is the new moon in Aries, or this is the new moon in Pisces. It will just say new moon. But as an astrologer, you would know, I hope, that if the sun is in Pisces, for instance, that any new moon we have is going to be a Pisces new moon, and if the sun is in Pisces, any full moon we have has to be a Virgo full moon. So that's great, and thanks for sharing that, Jen. I'm just going to click on that link. Hopefully that comes up there. And again, same kind of concept I think, which is great, because really we just need the data. This is all step one. How do we get the data? We've talked about new and full moon and how to spot retrogrades. Excellent. So this is how transit info works. If Saturn's at 5 Capricorn or Uranus is at 25 Aries, if you have any planets or degrees at 5 something of a sign or 25 something of a sign, they might be having a Uranus or a Saturn transit. Now, there's only certain signs in the zodiac that Saturn at 5 Capricorn will aspect. Can any of you guess or work out what signs those might be? The hint that I've got here for you guys is that think about aspects. So if Saturn was at 5 Capricorn, it's going to be conjunct any planets that are at 5 Capricorn, but it will also be squaring planets in 2 different places in the zodiac, and it will be opposing planets at one particular place in the zodiac. So have a think about that. If you've got some answers or some ideas, pop it in the chat box. The next piece is to think, okay, if Uranus is at 25 Aries, what and where is Uranus at 25 triggering? Uranus at 25 Aries will make a conjunction to any planet at 25 Aries, but it's also going to square planets at 25 of 2 other signs, and it's going to oppose planets at 25 degrees of one particular sign. So if you're following along, let me know what you think the answers are, and if not, I'm going to explain it to you shortly. But this is where, yeah, really starting to think about the aspects that a transiting planet makes. So I'll just give a minute. I'm actually just going to run and grab one little device that I need while you guys are thinking. I will be back momentarily. Okay, let's see how you guys are going with answers. Excellent, good. So one of the cheats is figuring out the aspects. Another way to kind of get yourself thinking about this is what modality is Saturn in? It's in a cardinal sign. What are the other cardinal signs? They will be the signs that get triggered by those more dynamic aspects. And then I've got some very, very clever people on the call, which is great. Also highlighting that Saturn at 5 Cap will make sextiles to 2 particular signs and will make trines to 2 particular signs as well. And in the more kind of streamlined model of astrology that I use, where we are just using those 5 aspects, we're using all 5. So it is important to consider the sextiles and trines. And in fact, our example tonight is going to talk you through that as well. Great. So Saturn at 5 Capricorn opposes Cancer. Planets around 5 Capricorn. Sorry, 5 Cancer. Saturn will also square planets at 5 Aries and 5 Libra. Saturn will sextile planets around 5 Pisces and 5 Scorpio, and Saturn will make a trine to planets around 5 Taurus and 5 Virgo. So just knowing where that one planet is, you get this kind of set of rays of energy shooting off from that place of Saturn, triggering and stirring up the natal points around those degrees. Uranus at 25 Aries is going to oppose planets at 25 Libra. It's going to square planets at 25 Cancer and 25 Cap. It'll sextile planets at 25 Aquarius and 25 Gemini. And Uranus at 25 Aries will make 2 trines to planets at 25 Leo and 25 Sag. So great work, team. Excellent. I think you've got the concept. So this is just a picture of the transits from the start of class tonight. And it's timed to my location, so the house placements are relevant for me here, but they won't necessarily be relevant for you. But this is less about the house placements because I'm not really interpreting this chart per se. We're just looking at, okay, yeah, so we've got Saturn here, 25 Cap. So Saturn will be opposing 25 Cancer. Sorry, I'm getting so confused now. Here we go. Sorry. Saturn at 5 Capricorn, opposing planets at 5 Cancer, squaring the 5 Aries and the 5 Libra. Just so you can see that, making the trine to 5 Taurus and to 5 Virgo. And did we do the sextiles? No. Sextiling up to 5 Pisces and 5 Scorpio. So that's what I mean by the set of rays that a transiting planet will create. And each of those rays is important. A sextile or a trine can be as strong a transit as a square or an opposition, but it may have less angst or less effort required. So when something comes in by sextile from Saturn or Uranus or Neptune or Pluto, don't regard it because you think a sextile is an easy aspect. Yes, sextiles bring things together with flow and with ease, but they still bring things together. And if we're talking about moving our lives forward, knowing when we're having some of those sextiles is equally important. Okay. Let's get on to our next. Also, we've still got the drawing tool. There we go. Here we go. Okay, so we also have to talk about orbs because, well, just in the same way that we look at the orbs of a aspect in a natal chart, you know, the orb of influence. And really, I think about it as an orb of intensity. The tighter the orb, the more intense. And orbs apply with predictions too. So what we'll be figuring out is, if Saturn's at 5 Capricorn, is it moving towards, known as applying, or moving away from, known as separating, a planet in your chart? Now, if you have a planet at 1 Capricorn or 1 Libra or 1 Cancer or 1 Aries, Saturn is actually now separating from making the aspect to that planet. So if it's separating and the orb is increasing, the intensity is decreasing. It's an inverse relationship. If the orb is increasing, then, or maybe it's the same, orb is increasing, intensity increasing, so maybe it's a parallel relationship. If the orb is decreasing, the intensity is decreasing too. So when things are pulling apart, now I've twisted my head, pulling apart, getting less intense, getting closer, getting more intense. I've overthought that one. How many degrees do you consider for a transiting planet, for an orb? So here's the thing. When we're doing transit aspects, orbs relate to time. And what that means is, the larger orb you have, the longer time frame in which you're saying an aspect, a transiting aspect, is affecting you. Realistically, orbs, you need a very tight orb. For a planet like Saturn, you could use an orb of about 3 or 4 degrees. For a planet like Jupiter, you could possibly use an orb of about 4 or 5 degrees. Jupiter moves faster than Saturn and is going to cover that 4 or 5 degree time frame much more quickly than Saturn. For the slowest moving planets, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, I would suggest use a very tight orb. Even if you use a 1 degree orb with a planet like Uranus, that extends the length of the transit from maybe a year to 3 years. And in my experience, that's not actually how long things last. What I do when I use orbs for transiting aspects, I look at the time when the planetary aspect is exact. So if Saturn's at 5 Capricorn, I'm looking for planets at 5 degrees that are being triggered. I will let the client know that before the first hit, so before the very first time the transit planet makes the exact aspect, we do have a build-in period where things are getting stronger, and that you might feel it anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months beforehand. But I tend to use an exact orb. So when I do timing with clients, I would say these are the months when the transit is exact and at its peak strength for you. And, you know, in the 2 months or the few weeks leading up to the first hit, I might say a few weeks if it's Saturn, and I might say a couple of months if it's Uranus, Neptune or Pluto. So in those few weeks or months leading up to the first hit, then we've got, you're starting to notice it. You're starting to anticipate. It's like your psyche is picking up on the shift in the vibration, but it's when we get that first full strength exact hit that the client's really going to feel it. So hopefully that helps answer that question. So we do need to keep in our mind the orbs, and when we get our example up, we'll be able to look at that a bit further. And the idea is we do need to go a little forwards and backwards, because we just looked at the transits for today, February 5th, 2018. But we need to center or anchor the movements of the planets today in the context of the last 12 months and the next 12 months. If we're going to talk about someone having a Uranus transit today or a Saturn transit today, we need to be able to say to them, you're having a transit today that's actually the second activation of a transit that began 3 months ago and is going to continue for another 6 months. Or we need to say you're having a transit today that's actually the third and final activation in a transit cycle that began a year ago. So that's why when you're starting to work with the cycles and you don't have them all memorized yet, I actually recommend that you look a year back and a year forward so that you can really get that sorted and you don't make a mistake, basically. Hopefully that is, so basically we want to know, has Saturn just got to 5 degrees Capricorn, or was it there 6 months ago? Has Uranus just got to 25 Aries for the first time, or has it already been there before? if Saturn hasn't been at 5 Capricorn yet, if this is the first time in this cycle, is it going to come back and trigger this Saturn at 5, this 5 degrees Capricorn? Is it going to hit that degree a few times over a 9-month period, or is it only going to trigger it once? Now, if you're using a pretty sophisticated software program like Solarfire, for instance, you can run a report that will just tell you all this data. I do tend to encourage students to do it the long way, aka the hard way first, just while you're learning, because it actually helps you understand the cycles better. So it's not that I'm trying to make it harder for you, it's just that I know if you go through the ephemeris and you literally go back every month for 12 months and you go forward every month for 12 more months, you will get a much better understanding of how the planets, how quickly and slowly the planets move, how they spend so much time at 1 degree when they're in, say, a station retrograde or what have you. So it's almost like doing your scales. Predictive astrology, the scales basically involves reviewing the ephemeris quite frequently. And it gives you such an amazing foundation. And Nadia, who's obviously got her eagle eye ephemeris out, this is the first time in this cycle that Saturn has been at 5 Capricorn. Exactly. Which is very good to know from a timing perspective. The next piece would be, okay, is it coming back before the end of the year, for instance? Yeah, the ephemeris is a great tool. So we are recording this class just after the Super Bowl, and I don't really know anything about NFL. I'm Australian, and we have different sports in the crazy country that I'm from, but I do know that they have this wonderful halftime show, because that's usually what I end up seeing. And Justin Timberlake was the featured performer at the Super Bowl halftime show this year. So I thought it was interesting because it's a very prestigious gig. It's a very high profile gig for a musician or a performer. You get a huge exposure from this one gig. So I just thought, I'll take a quick look at Justin Timberlake's chart. We had an accurate birth time for him, which was great. And I thought, well, let's just see what's going on. We're going to work, I think, mostly with the Uranus transit. And if you're taking a look at the chart, you'll probably see why. Uranus is activating that 25-degree marker of Aries right now. And Justin Timberlake has quite a few things in his chart around that 25-degree mark. So the ephemeris has told us that Uranus is at 25 Aries. And this is my preferred way of working with transits in people's charts, is I actually like to print the natal chart off, and then old school with a pen, I actually have a bunch of coloured markers, and I like to use a different colour for different planets, and then I just draw them in on the piece of paper. I'll be doing it with my ephemeris so that I've got the accurate data, and then that helps me get into the feel of the cycles, which is lovely. So if Uranus is now at 25 Aries, that means it is making a square to his natal Venus at 25 Capricorn. It is making a sextile to his natal Mars and descendant conjunction at 25 Aquarius, and is making a trine to his ascendant in Leo. So this Uranus transit is hitting off quite a few things in Justin's chart. And so this is the data that we'd gather, and then our task is to organize and prioritize the data and then go ahead with interpreting it. Now, one of the little rules that we use in transit work is this idea that not all transits are created equal. And there are 2 simple rules or 2 simple ways to help you understand which transits might be more important in general and might be more important in the context of your chart. So this will bring me back just to a little bit of a sidebar to set a platform and then come back in. One of the pieces I mentioned in the intro tonight was that I use the house rulership system. And it's really important to know which planets rule which houses and which angles in your chart. The ascendant and the midheaven are 2 absolutely critical, significant, prominent points in the chart. So knowing the signs on your ascendant and your midheaven, they're known as angles. So knowing the signs on the ascendant and midheaven is very important, but more important from a timing perspective is knowing the ruling planets of those 2 angles. So for Justin Timberlake, the ruling planets of his angles, he's got a Leo ascendant, which means the sun is his ascendant ruling planet, and he's got a Taurus midheaven, which means Venus, okay, that's a bad draw, that one again. Venus is the ruling planet of his midheaven. So if I have to make a priority list for Justin Timberlake, I'm going to be especially sensitive to transits that affect his natal Venus and his natal Sun. The reason for this is that a planet that rules the midheaven is in charge of your career, your work life, but also your life direction as a whole. So any triggers to the planet that rules your midheaven are going to have this flow on or trickle down effect into your career and your life as a whole. The planet that rules your ascendant, in traditional or ancient astrology, they call this planet the helmsman, or the planet at the helm. And this is the planet that has its hands on the steering wheel of your life. The ancient Greeks conceptualized your life or your birth chart as a ship, and the planet ruling the ascendant was the one that was steering the wheel. Now, sometimes we have someone with their hands on the steering wheel who shouldn't have their hands on the steering wheel. Sometimes we have a really really strong helmsman. But those sort of pieces are from our chart interpretation work. The key at this point from a timing perspective is to know what these two really prominent planets are in your chart. And then anytime you see a transit triggering your ascendant ruling planet or your midheaven ruling planet, you're going to bump those transits right to the top of your priority list. We just know that if the planet rules the ascendant natally or rules the midheaven, it's in charge of a lot. And therefore, if it receives a transit and has to go through some sort of shifting or change process, it's going to affect some really significant things in your life. Hopefully that concept's clear for you guys. If you need any to clarify anything, please let me know. So we've got 3 transits to choose from here for Justin Timberlake. Uranus at 25 Aries, sex square the Venus, sextile the Mars, trine the ascendant. So I would prioritize the square to Venus. I would bump that up to the top of my priority list. And then that would be the transit that I would then put my best effort into interpreting. I'm definitely interested in the fact that he's having Uranus sextile Mars and trine the ascendant. But if we're limited for time, for instance, I'm going to pick that slightly more significant transit. So now that we've gathered some data, the tip is to begin our interpretive process. And there's a few different ways that we can go about that. And I just want to move on to the next slide for a moment before we come back to doing that. So this is a summary slide of the data we've just worked through, that he's got 3 different points in his chart being triggered by Uranus at 25 Aries. Now, if we want to flesh this example out, what we would actually be doing is going back to our ephemeris and looking 12 months in the past and 12 months in the future to see, has Uranus been at 25 Aries before, or is this the first time? Now, just for simplicity's sake, since we're in the middle of a class tonight, I've done that checking for you. And basically the first time Uranus hit 25 Aries was back in April and May of 2017. So that would have been the first activation, first square, Uranus to Venus, if we use that one. In November of 2017, Uranus was back at 25 Aries and made the second activation. And then right now, February, and it'll also be early March, Uranus is back at 25 Aries for the 3rd and final time. And so this is like, if you like, the completion stage of that longer Uranus square Venus transit that Justin Timberlake is in. So now we've got all the data we need. We know that this transit conforms to the classic 3-hit activation, which is sort of like the standard or the most common pattern. There are some transits where we just have 1 hit. It's what I call a 1-hit wonder, where it's short but very intense. And there are some transits where we get a 5-hitter, where there is a second retrograde where the planet comes back to the same degree. And that makes it, of course, a lot more significant. 28 Aries is one of those examples. We had Uranus at 28 Aries in the middle of 2017. We're going to have it very shortly, March and April of 2018. And then we'll have it again. We'll almost have like the 4th and 5th hit will be very close together. We sort of had 2 hits together because Uranus is stationing at 28 Aries twice middle of 2017 and very early 2019. So you'll notice these little links coming through. So I might just need a little clarification on this question. So in terms of the Uranus transit, because it's a Uranus transit to the birth chart, because what we're looking at on the screen right now is Justin Timberlake's birth chart. So his Venus at 25 Cap won't move per se. That's his sensitive degree, if you like. All of his Venus things are represented by that energetically sensitive point for him. And so so technically, yeah, Venus isn't at 25 Capricorn in the sky now, but that's where it was when he was born. And so your birth chart is sort of a map of those degrees in the zodiac that you are especially attuned to and sensitive to. So I think that might answer that question. And if not, let me know if you need more clarification there. So Uranus square Venus, 3-hit process. Now we need to flesh out our interpretation. Got lots of data here. So here's a few steps around the interpretive piece. What I will say just before I move on to this next slide, we've sort of jumped right into the really meaty, rich type of transit where you've got one planet activating another planet. But transiting planets also influence the houses that they move through in the birth chart. And a planet like Uranus is going to spend about 8 years in a zodiac sign. And for those of you, this chart is in the whole sign system. So what you might have noticed is that the sign boundaries become the house boundaries. And so that makes it a little bit more simple and clear from a timing perspective, that the whole time Uranus is in Aries, it's been triggering this 9th house for Justin Timberlake. And when Uranus moves out of Aries into Taurus, we'll get a shift where all of us start feeling the Uranus energy in our Taurus house and not in our Aries house. So that's another way. If you don't have, for instance, if Uranus at 25 Aries isn't directly triggering your chart, you'll still be wrapping up that longer Uranus in Aries trend, which is coming to its end over the next 12 months. So just a little point there that transiting planets will activate planets in your chart, and that's the most intense and most dramatic type of transit, but they can also just pass through a house, which still creates like a change in mood or weather around the topics of that house. Okay, so now let's dive into a little bit more of the interpretive info here. So this is some of our step-by-step process for transits. We've gathered the data, what transits are happening and when. We've done a little bit of prioritization. We've sort of honed in on the Uranus-Venus transit because for Justin, Venus rules that midheaven and becomes a more significant planet for him. But now we need to figure out what are the natal themes that are being activated by this Uranus-Venus. What are the houses? What are the topics? And then go from there. So slide number 19 is now starting to pull that together. Transiting Uranus is in the 9th house for Justin. So it's stirring up experiences to do with global or international opportunities, to do with travel and adventure, to do with his personal faith and philosophy, the things he believes in. Uranus in the 9th is squaring his Venus, and his Venus is in the 6th house. So the 6th house is one of our work sectors. And interestingly for Justin, Venus is in the 6th, a work sector, but rules the midheaven, which is the main career point. So Venus obviously has a lot to do with his work and his career. Venus in Capricorn, the interpretation of that is about relationships with co-workers or colleagues that need to have that sort of connection or support because it's Venus there. Could talk about someone who's very hardworking, can talk about someone who works in a Venus field like the arts or creativity in some way. The themes themselves are going to come from the combination of the planet energies. So we've got Venus in Capricorn, who maybe usually prefers a really structured, really familiar work environment. She's quite diligent and very hardworking. And we've got Uranus coming in, Uranus being spontaneous and unpredictable and exciting. So the meat of the interpretation comes from how that Venus in Capricorn has to change or do things differently to honor and hold the energy of Uranus, which is showing up at this particular point in his life. So, for example, Uranus might have to do with things like technology, with innovation, with an unpredictable schedule, or things happening spur of the moment or last minute. Uranus Venus does have a bit of an explosive quality. It looks fairly exciting, but it looks like there's a lot of work required to make it happen because it's a square and not a sextile or a trine. So what we're doing there is just taking some of the keywords of Uranus and we're blending them with some of the Venus in Capricorn keywords and concepts. So it's almost like you're trying to put yourself in the Venus in Capricorn shoes to think about what she needs, how she normally operates, and then that helps you understand what has to change and how she might feel about it. Venus in Capricorn, like all planets in Capricorn, is grounded, practical, and organized. So transits from Uranus to those Capricorn planets are uncomfortable. They really push Capricorn planets outside their comfort zone. So we've talked a little bit about the houses too. And so we're all sort of looking to blend those different layers together. It's a 9th house transiting planet to a 6th house planet. Venus rules the 3rd house and then the 10th house. So I just want to pull that chart back up for a second, just so you guys can see the different houses. Now, some of the reading that you've got, Bernadette Brady talks about a thing called a transit grid. It might be in the week 2 reading. And we will come back to that next week, or maybe in week 3. But this is partly what she's talking about. The transiting planet's here in the 9th. It's affecting a planet in the 6th. So it's something about maybe an international travel or study opportunity and how that affects your everyday life, maybe your regular wellness routine or your regular work routine. It's talking about some tension, because it's a square, between the 9th house and 6th house. Because the transit or trigger planet is in the 9th, the turmoil or the change or the upheaval is coming into the person's life from a 9th house type event, and it's impacting the 6th house area of life because that's where the planet is that's receiving it. It's also going to impact the houses in the chart ruled by Venus, which will be the 3rd house and the 10th house. So Venus rules the sign of Libra, which is on the midheaven in the 10th house in this chart. And Venus, sorry, that's Taurus up the top. Venus rules Libra, which is on the 3rd here, and Venus rules Taurus, which is on the 10th and the midheaven here. So another level of interpretation just of this one Uranus-Venus transit is that there may be an unpredictable twist to do with a contractual matter. Uranus bringing unpredictable, Venus ruling the 3rd house of contract. There might be a sudden or an exciting development to do with a sibling. Uranus being sudden or exciting, Venus ruling the 3rd, representing siblings. Venus ruling the career, this international thing or something that's got a global, it's like getting an invitation to speak at a global conference or to have your work published overseas, or maybe even just finding a retreat that you want to go to that's going to take you away from your normal routine. And these are all different examples or iterations of this 9th house to 6th house transit. Great, this is a really good question. Where does it start, the 9th or the 6th? The transit starts in the 9th, so the trigger will always come from where the transiting planet is. So the trigger is the transit planet. So the trigger will be the nature of Uranus, the topics of the 9th house in an Aries way for Justin. The areas of life that have to respond to that trigger are the 6th house, the 3rd house, and the 10th house. So I'm hoping that piece is clear, but definitely ask me any questions if it's not. So the trigger or where it starts is where the transit is. And in this case, it would be Uranus in Aries in the 9th. So that's where it could be the invitation to speak overseas. That would be a 9th house thing. What does it do? It might force you to change your everyday routine, which would be a 6th house thing. Maybe you have to sign a contract, which is a 3rd house thing. So I hope that helps answer that question, but do let me know if there are any more questions, because it's the transiting planet that is always going to be, that's what's bringing a fresh energy in, if you like. That's what's new and that's what's different. That's what, in this case, Justin is that's the planet he's looking to accommodate for this time frame. So Uranus squares Venus from the 9th house, which triggers or stirs up 6th house events, 3rd house because it's ruled by Venus, and 10th house because it's ruled by Venus. So hopefully that piece is clear. And yeah, let me know if you've got any more questions too. So here we go. So back to our slide 19, our interpretive piece. I think we've run through all of those points. We've talked about, and part of the reason to go through this is to show you just how much information you can get out of one transit. And so there's always 3 or 4 or 5 things that you can say about one particular transit. And I know it sounds like a lot and you might not feel like you're being specific, but the key here is that our lives don't operate in isolation. When we do have something that gets stirred up over here, it usually affects a couple of areas of life. If you get sick, it doesn't just affect your home life where you're coughing and spluttering, it can affect your ability to work. Maybe you don't get to the gym, so you don't get to see your friend. You know, there's always 2 or 3 areas of our life that do operate together or in that sense of connection. So what I wanted to do now is just sort of really spell out that 3-hit transit process, which we've alluded to, but I wanted to flesh it out a little bit more for you guys. So this slide here, slide 20, is speaking to really how specific we get with our data gathering. And we've had a talk through that around, you know, what are the months that Uranus is at 25 Aries. And the other thing I should say just on Justin's chart, which I thought was really interesting, yes, he has a number of planets at 25 degrees, but he also has some planets at 24 degrees. Pluto is at 24 Libra. His moon Neptune conjunction is at 24 Sag. So basically, last week when Uranus was at 24 Aries, it was triggering the parts of his chart that were at 24 degrees of Sag and Libra. So just in a chart like Justin's, where you have a lot of things 24, 25 degrees, a lot of things are around the same degree marker, what can happen is you get like a domino effect where one planet hits just 1 degree, but it sends all these kind of spray rays out into the chart. And so there can be a lot going on. It's not necessarily that this is the normal thing that happens, but you will see this in charts from time to time. And I think it's good to be mindful that for some clients, they're not just having one transit in isolation, they're actually having a series of transits from the same planet. Now, we've talked a little bit about orbs and time in degrees, but let's just flesh this out a little bit. And this is sort of why I do like to keep the orbs really tight. So we'd said that Uranus got to 25 Aries in April of 2017. If we were using a 5-degree orb, which seems to be pretty standard, or it's sort of a default in the software program, sometimes you have to reset them. If we were using a 5-degree orb for this transit, then Uranus would have started making this transit back in 2015. And I just think that's a little unrealistic. So yeah, I would just literally use a 1-degree or even a 0-degree orb, so looking at that exact, particularly for the slower outer moving planets. We've talked a little bit about the link between time and orbs. For instance, Saturn can cover 3 degrees in a 4-week period, whereas Uranus might just cover 1 degree. The difference between applying and separating, that has to do, that seems to be a new concept for some people. If you're a bit confused by those ideas, let me know. What we're basically looking at in this Justin Timberlake example for that, when Uranus is at 23 and 24 degrees, it's applying, it's moving towards the 25-degree marker. And then as long as it's moving forward, or direct, I should say, and this might be better illustrated on the chart. So if we've got, here we go, because what's going to happen now, where are we? Yeah, so what happened, so April of, here's the 25-degree Aries. April of 2017, Uranus sailed through here, squaring the Venus, sextiling the Mars, trining the ascendant. Then in the middle of 2017, Uranus went retrograde and it came back through that 25-degree marker. Then Uranus stationed direct and is coming now through for the 3rd time. And so now that Uranus is moving through 25 degrees, it's going to be separating. So separating means the planet is physically moving away from the natal point, and it also means the effect of the transit is starting to diminish or lessen. Now, transits are not like a light switch. They don't go off and on. It's not like as soon as Uranus gets to 26 degrees, it's done. It's more like a sunrise or a sunset, where there is a bit of the fade in and the fade out. And that's why you can feel it in advance. That's where we get that kind of build-up period. And so if you think about a 1 to 2 degree orb for the applying first hit, I think that'll give you the right amount of time per planet. 1 to 2 degrees for Saturn gives you about a 2 to 4 week build-in. 1 to 2 degrees for Uranus can give you that 1 to 2 month build-in transit, which is appropriate. 1 to 2 degrees and therefore 1 to 2 months is also the right amount of fade in or fade out energy, if you like, for Neptune and Pluto as well, just to be really clear about those. So the orbs and the applying and separating. Is the transit coming in and getting stronger, which means we haven't yet seen the full potential of it, or is the transit done and fading out? Which means we've experienced all it has to offer, and now we're just more in the processing and integration phase. And the classic transit triggers a 3-part process, which we've talked a little bit about today. So I just wanted to run through that piece. That's what we'll do as our final bit for class tonight. And then you guys will have a sense of the theory, and we can get into some of the really nitty-gritty of, you know, Saturn through the houses and what does Uranus do by transit anyway. I'm not sure it'll be next week or the week after. We'll go through some really, like, I'll just be giving you a lot of interpretive info about this is what Uranus does by transit. This is what Pluto does. This is what your clients will experience. And it's from that interpretive info that we share in class that you will get a lot of your language and your ideas that you can then share with clients. So the classic 3-part transit process is literally when you get 3 direct or exact hits from a transiting planet to a natal point or planet. The first hit will be the most intense or dramatic. It will be potentially the most difficult or the most shocking. The first hit is when the normal vibration of our being gets awakened or stirred up to this new force or this new energy that is going to be hosted in our chart and in our lives for a period of time. And this is usually, the first hit is usually going to be the recognition, the revelation, the shock, the change. This is when the proverbial hits the fan, or we get those things coming out. If it's a Uranus transit, it's that feeling of being blindsided. If it's the Saturn transit, it's that reality check of, oh my God, how did I get here? If it's a Pluto transit, it could be the revelation, it could be strength, it could be betrayal. And we'll talk about some of those more planet-specific concepts next week. But the idea is that, and part of the reason, oh, hang on, I just had 3 thoughts at once. When you're talking with clients about this, it's good for them, they need to know the full length of the transit so that they know how long a planet's going to be around. But it's also helpful for them to understand that it's a process, and it's not as though the same thing happens at every hit, especially if they're just through the first hit of a transit and now they've just heard there's going to be a second and a third hit, and they're like, oh my God, that first hit was a bit intense. The second hit is when the transiting planet is actually retrograde. So the transiting planet in the first hit comes through and it's direct and it's racing along, and then it goes beyond the exact degree of the transit and it stops and it comes back. It's like a car reversing. It's not going to be as potent or as powerful. The planet has already been there. It's not new to you anymore. It's familiar. You might not know what to do with it yet, but at least you understand the lay of the land of that transiting planet. So the second hit is a lot about revision. It's about trial and error. It's about attempting to adjust or to make changes based on the events or experiences that happened at the first hit. So the second hit isn't usually about new stuff coming forward, but rather it's your attempt to integrate and work with or accommodate this new force that has shown up in your life. The third hit of the 3-part transit process is the finalization. This is about, we want the resolution, we're getting a problem solved, we've made a decision, we're completing something. So it's not always as neat as it's all done by the third hit, but usually the focus around whatever topics are stirred up in the transit, we get to a place of internal completion. I know how I'm dealing with that now. Maybe it's got a few more months to run because that is, you know, the nature of the situation, but I've done my part and now we're just playing it out. So the third hit is when it sort of all comes together. It's a little different in each scenario. For some people, for instance, if it's a Saturn transit, the first hit is the reality check that you've maybe got too much on your plate or you've overextended yourself. The second hit could be when you start practicing delegation and you'll get it right sometimes and you won't get it right other times. And the third hit of a Saturn transit, for instance, one example can be that now you've got your restructured plan or schedule in place and you're moving forward under this improved paradigm, which is the work that you've gone through, the restructuring or the decluttering through that transit of Saturn. If anyone has any questions about this 3-part transit process, please let me know. You can pop them in the chat box now or send them through with your homework during the week too. So understanding that most transits are not the one-hit wonders that I referenced earlier. 90% of transits fall into this 3-part process. So when you can see that you're having a transit right now, you will want to check back 12 months in the past, 12 months in the future, just to figure out when the first, second, and third hit are happening. And so for Justin, for instance, right now, he's having the third hit of his Uranus square Venus transit. So it's the resolution, the completion, or the finalization of a process that began for him at the first hit, which was in April of 2017. Now, who knows? I'm only speculating. I'm not his manager. I don't run his business affairs. But maybe it was in the early part of 2017 when the first hit of Uranus-Venus happened that he started thinking about or hearing rumors about. Maybe he was going to be invited to the Super Bowl show. Maybe he was pitching for the show at that time. Maybe he had to wait to hear. He didn't find out till the second hit if he was going to do it. Maybe he heard on the first hit and then he was trying to figure out how to make it happen on the second hit. I wanted to give you a little bit of a structure that you can sort of slot the details of your clients' stories into as you work through your transiting process. So you do need to kind of blend the story or the narrative that shows up in your life or in your client's life, but these are the most common ways that a transit will unfold. So this is the most common, to have the 3-hit process. Sometimes we have the 1 hit and sometimes we have the 5 hit. So if you have the 5 hit, you kind of get hits 2 and 3 repeated. You get a second chance at the revision and trial and error period, the integration part, and then, you sort of get, so you're just kind of working it longer and deeper if you've got a 5-hit transit. And then if you've only got a 1-hit transit, basically you've just got to do all of these things in that 2 to 3 month time frame. So that's really intense because you get the recognition, oh my God, I've got to change something, first hit. You go through the whole process, you just go through it in a much shorter time frame, which is what makes a 1-hit transit seem much more intense. So yeah, it's much shorter, and it does sound nice to have a 2-month Pluto transit rather than an 18-month Pluto transit. It just means it's an incredibly heightened, intense, like very pressured for that period of time. So in any transit, this is the process. You get a recognition, oh my God, something needs to change. And we can figure out what that something is based on the nature of the transiting planet, the nature of the natal planet receiving the transit, and the houses involved. Then we have to figure out what we're going to do about that. The light bulb's gone off. Now we've got to put those ideas into action. And then whenever, as you guys know, when you put new ideas into action, you never get it right the first time. So you need a little bit of, okay, this was, I tried this thing, one part of it worked, parts of it didn't. So I'll keep that one part that worked and try these other things. If you've only got a one-hit transit from Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, you will probably find yourself in a bit of a pressure cooker situation where you've got to turn something around really quickly, or external circumstances force your hand in an unreasonably short time frame. If that makes sense, I'm hoping that makes sense, Jen, for your question. But if you or anyone else needs more clarification, please let me know. So timing is everything, and you do want to make sure you really know when something is happening. So hopefully we've made that, we've made that really nice and clear, which is great. Okay, and that brings us, excellent. That is the conclusion of the formal presentation for tonight's class. What we've looked at today is an overview of what a transit is and how it can trigger your chart. We use that example of Uranus in the 9th house for Justin Timberlake triggering his Venus. So transit Uranus in the 9th, triggering his Venus in the 6th. And we've seen him get this sort of fairly prestigious, very high profile work opportunity that's exciting. It's a bit unique. You know, the Super Bowl is a one-off thing. You know, it's a Uranus to Venus. It's a Uranus work transit. And that's not going to necessarily bring something that's it's not going to bring something that's ongoing or stable or continuing. It's more likely to bring one of those breakthrough experiences. If it was a Saturn transit to your career planet, then you're going to get something that you kind of commit to and you go with on a consistent or ongoing basis. But it's a Uranus transit. So we get this one exciting, explosive event, and then we're done. So that's just an example of that transit. So he's just done the Super Bowl halftime show, which for many performers is a once in a lifetime gig. And so you're seeing what a transit is and how it can trigger your chart. So over the next couple of weeks, what we're going to do is just really dive into fleshing out our keywords and our interpretive ideas. Also, we'll go a little bit deeper into the timing. And what we're going to be working is that concept that I introduced tonight around the different houses and the different topics that can be triggered by a transit, that it's not just about the house the natal planet that's receiving the transit is in. And that can be a bit of a far out concept for people. So we're going to work through examples each week just so that you all start to get really familiar with that. What happens next is that you will have a homework assignment posted in the week 1 online class page, and that gets posted within 24 hours. You will have access to the video and the recording that will go up also within 24 hours. You have access to this information for, as far as I know, it's for eternity. Tony tells me that we don't kick people out once you've paid, the information's here. You know, every now and then we'll be updating some of the info and you'll continue to have access to that. The reading has been posted as well. So there's some different articles to read each week. There's usually more reading in weeks 1, 2, and 3. Don't be daunted by that. Just do what you can. The reading is designed just to help give you another point of view and further reflection and repetition time from the concepts we've talked about in class. Now, if you are here in the live class, now's your chance to ask any questions you've got too. So you're welcome to pop them in the chat box. Rihanna's saying he's also just released or is about to release a new body of work. Yeah, I did wonder that, Rihanna, actually, with Justin Timberlake. I'm like, does he have a new album out? Is he going on tour soon? Because that strong Uranus transit, I mean, he's had like 4 or 5 different Uranus transits in the last year. And I wondered if he has been busy working on new things that have a fresh or different sound to what he's done in the past. And if we're going to see more of those coming forward in the next little while. And okay, and Rihanna's saying yes, that his new music is very different. So that's the key, is that when you have a Uranus transit that affects your career, and it can affect your career in a few ways. It can affect, you know, the ruling planet of your midheaven, like it did for Justin, or, you know, Venus in the 6th, which would be another career vibration. You want to do things differently. So yeah, he'll be breaking out of a mold that he's felt he's been in, which will be exciting to watch. Okay, can we do our homework with the house system that you use? If you're using, to a certain extent, so if you're going to reference an intermediary house cusp, intermediary house cusps are like the 2nd house, the 3rd house, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and sorry, not the 7th, the 8th and the 9th, and then the 11th and 12th, I would encourage you to try considering what the whole sign ruling planet of that house would be. You will get better results. That's why. That's my only reason why. For angles, for sure. The angles are the same in any house system. So if you're going to talk about career, you can just talk about the midheaven. Ascendant and descendant will be the same. And if you're not sure, if this is the first time you've sort of seen anything in whole sign, just do the best you can. If you're not sure some of the terms I'm using, you can email me before you send your homework in too, and I can give you any further extra direction. The only reason that I would suggest, for instance, the 5th house, the meaning of the houses largely comes from the relationship of the sign to the ascendant. So the 5th house is the house of good things of the body, to use a very simplified version of the technical ancient term. It's the house of, oh God, I always get it wrong, good fortune, I think. Good spirit is the 11th. So the 5th house is about good things that happen to us and for us and through our body. And in traditional astrology, that would include sex and babies. And one of the reasons that the 5th house is connected to children and fertility is that the original or intended relationship between the sign on the 5th and the sign on the ascendant would be a trine. And so if you have a Sagittarius ascendant, the trine sign onto your 5th house will be Aries, which is another fire sign. In some of the intermediary house cusps in the quadrant-based systems like Placidus or Regiomontanus, Co, that type of thing, you might end up with Pisces on the 5th or with Taurus on the 5th, which doesn't fully honor that sign relationship. So that's one reason, just to get you thinking. But if it's all a little bit confusing and overwhelming, I'm happy for you to do it in the way that's easiest for you. Mostly is I want to get you thinking about the idea of the ruling planet of a house being connected to the topics of that house. So hopefully that helps with that question, Tara. And yeah, feel free just to shoot me an email if you need more info there. And Jen is saying, for larger time periods in one glance for one planet on the Swiss ephemeris, you can click on planetary cycles and sign ingresses for a planet by planet basis over time. So there you go. That sounds like they've got a bit of a working software program in there that you can manipulate, which is great. I'm not going to pretend it's fast to go through things month by month, but I think it does it slows us down a little bit to really sit with and integrate at that deeper unconscious level how the planets' cycles unfold. Yeah, so I think that's probably more than enough to get you started for tonight. So there'll be a little bit of a homework exercise for you guys to practice some of the things we've talked about tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. And I guess that's it from me. If there's no more questions, I shall let you guys all get on with your days or your evenings. And I'll see you all same time, same place next week, guys. Bye for now. Okay. All right, so there's that. Okay. Bye, guys.